daar heb je een beetje een ei van, maar dat wil ik niet.
If you save Andy's questions for the end,
Okay, let's continue.
Okay, so as I was saying, the fallout from all of these pizza nights led to another little episode, which was Poker Point Conundrum. And basically, what I found was that because of the experience that we had with doing so much overtime and cheating and overperforming, the backlash from that meant that many of the team members were really reluctant to be seen to be overperforming again because of the negative impact from the stakeholders and the reactions from the other teams, all that kind of stuff. So what this meant was that they began engineering their poker points or their estimations of story complexity to make sure that they would fit within a sprint. Because we were estimating our own stories, we were the only team working on a current project. They were basically planning ahead. And so they were using logic like, we should do 24 points in a sprint. We can do 2 of those stories. So between them, they equate to 24 points. And they were no longer really, estimating in comparison to the rest of the backlog. It was all engineered. And so this meant that the team appeared to have static velocity. And this didn't matter so much from the business perspective, because all the business cares about is, hey, we know how much this team's going to produce and predictability. Okay. Great. Yeah. So the business didn't notice this, they didn't feel this, but I did, and I noticed that hey, I know the team's getting quicker, they're gelling, they're getting better at their jobs, they're doing more work, they're doing better quality work, but they're not getting the internal recognition. They're not seeing their velocity increase in line with what they're actually achieving. And so we had to find a solution to this. And in the lead up to this, there were huge amounts of discussions. I talked to all of the other Scrum Masters and how can we do this? And I had lots of discussions with the team about how poker points don't mean anything, and it's all about measuring your relative velocity as time goes on and all of this kind of stuff, and it wasn't sinking in with them. I wasn't getting buy-in, and there was still this huge resistance to changing the way that we poker. And so I went and spoke to all of the other Scrum Masters, and how do I go about doing this? How do I engineer it so that the team can accept this, basically? And the opinion of the other Scrum Masters was that this is one of those rare occasions as a Scrum Master where you do actually have to enforce something, because part of the Scrum Master's job description is to ensure that Scrum is being done properly, is being enacted properly. And in my opinion, in this particular case, it just wasn't. So in the end, I had to tell the team, okay, I sat them down, we went back through the historical product backlog, which we maintain digitally, and we created a wall of reference of stories, basically. And it was 1 story per possible poker card value from 1 through to, I think, 20, something like that. And I ensured that most of the stories that we picked as reference points had actually been pokered by other teams and built by other teams as well. To force them to not think, okay, how long did it take us to do that, but how complex is that piece of work in relation to the others? And so we ended up with this new range of stories, and then we had our first poker session, and there was still considerable resistance from the team. And but the feedback immediately afterwards, after the poker session and in the following retrospective, was that it went a lot better. And what they found was that they were suddenly pokering things a lot higher. But the idea is when you give your estimations in poker, it's just to tell the business, okay, how much work is this? And then when you come to do your planning session, you use your average velocity, however many points you do per sprint on average, as a guideline for how much do you think you can do this sprint. But ultimately, you look at the stories in the backlog and you take the knowledge that you have from them, from the poker sessions and the demos by the architects and the VAs, and you decide, can we complete this amount of work in the sprint? Who cares about the points? The points are just there for the business, they're not for the team. How much work is this? And actually, that's working really, really well now. And then another thing that we've had to deal with is the Spartan line, which I mentioned earlier on. You saw a little comment about it on that burn down chart that I showed you earlier. This is pretty much how our burn down charts always used to work. You know, we'd go along appearing not to burn any hours at all for a week and a half, and then all of a sudden, right at the end, we'd finish everything. And here's an example of an actual Spartan. So we should be here. So I thought about this really long and hard, and this was happening when I was developing, and also when I was a Scrum Master. And I thought, why? Why is this happening? We're clearly completing the work. We're not biting off too much. We're completing all of the sprints. We're doing everything. And there could have been many reasons for this. Maybe it was poor estimation in the poker sessions. Maybe it was poor task planning. Maybe we were working inefficiently during the beginning of the sprint and only managing to get our acts together towards the end. Or maybe we're just getting started slowly. Maybe it takes time for people to get into their work, and and then you reach peak velocity, and then suddenly everything gets done. Or maybe it was something else. And I suspected that it was because we weren't being thorough in our task planning. One of the difficult things as a Scrum Master is that you're not a manager. You can't tell the team to do stuff. All of the impetus has to come from the team. The team has to see the benefits of things. They have to see problems. They have to come up with the solutions. The Scrum Master's job is to act as a catalyst and to ensure that the team addresses the problems, that they think about them, that they try and look for solutions, and you can nudge them in the right direction. And usually as Scrum Master, because you've got an overview of everything, and the whole thing about being able to see the wood for the trees, quite often you can see what's going wrong. But if you want stuff to work, if you want the team to pick things up and actually do them, it has to come from them. And that's one of the most important things about Scrum, I think. As I say, the team should be self-managing. And so I spoke to one of the other Scrum Masters who's been a project manager for 20 years, and how can we do this? And I think this is a really beautiful example of how these stupid charts that we maintain, how they really work and how they can actually do stuff. There is a point to them. So the solution that we came up with was to add a couple of extra lines to our burn down chart. One of them for tracking unplanned hours, and the other one for tracking hours that we spent helping members of the offshore team we were working with. And so during morning stand-ups, if there was a team member and he says, oh, okay, I've only burnt 1 hour from that sticky in a whole day of work, you ask the question, why? Oh, because there was something we forgot we had to do. And so then you get them to actually make another sticky for this forgotten task or for this forgotten step, whatever it may be, and you get them to add it to the board, even if they're going to burn the hours immediately, whatever, we had to make it visible that people were forgetting stuff in the initial task plan. Yeah. This meant that sometimes our hours actually went up instead of down. And here's the result for the first sprint of this new way of working. And you can see, day one here, we reckon we've got to do 141 hours in a team of, I think it was about 12 people at the time, for 3 weeks, which is clearly ridiculous. And then, straight away, on the next day, we suddenly added 61 hours of unplanned tasks. And you can see the 2 lines going up absolutely in parallel. And so this made it immediately completely visible to the team what was going on. So as Scrum Master, I didn't say to them, hey, you're planning badly. All I did was add an extra line to the chart, which made it immediately visible to them what was going wrong. And so then in a retrospective at the end of the sprint, we talk to them about it and say, hey, look at our lines, what's going on here. And then ensues a huge discussion about task planning and how we can do it more efficiently and more effectively. And so this was initially pretty disheartening because the line goes up instead of down, which no one likes. But as I say, the cause was all of a sudden immediately obvious for everyone to see. And so in the retrospective, we talked about why. And the feedback from the team was, interestingly, no one had said this before, the technical discussions during task planning were just too heavy. And so people were zoning out, If the Java guys are going massively into detail about some implementation thing, you know, the tester just loses interest, whatever, you know, all of this kind of stuff is happening. And also because demo days are incredibly heavy anyway, you start off with your demo, well, you start off with your stand-up, then you have a massive demo, then we have a stakeholder meeting, then we have our retrospective, and then we go into the task planning. And this is at the end of the day, and everyone's massively drained, you know, it's a very emotionally draining day. And so people are just rushing it. And so the solution, which is still in progress, is that we timebox discussions during task planning. And then during the discussions, you just have to try and keep the team on focus, you know. Okay, all discussions are valuable, but is it one that's actually going to influence the stickies that we're putting on the board? Or is it something that should be taken offline later? And that's the question that has to be constantly asked, or still does. And also, you know, again, the team is self-policing. And so you find the testers saying, hey, you've forgotten to do your BDD sticky. Or you've forgotten to do your documentation sticky. Or what about this? You forgot that last time, you know? And you find that the team jointly pulls together to try and make it work. And this is the kind of behaviour that you see when the team is made responsible for their own success. And when they are put in a position where they can identify problems and work to the solutions themselves through their own motivation. And so all of this has resulted, or is slowly resulting in more focused and productive and shorter task planning sessions. Then we can already see some improvement. And this is the burn down line from this sprint. You can see the same thing going on, but it's nowhere near as drastic as it was 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago. And so we're improving. And what I've started doing now actually is noting on exactly what was forgotten in the task each time, so that we can have an even more productive discussion in the next retrospective.
What's the line at the bottom? The Phoenix line?
Yeah, the Phoenix line. This is the hours that we spend helping our offshore team, which is also decreasing, which is also good. Okay, well, there's a huge amount more stuff I'd love to say. But let's wrap up with a few tips, and this is particularly for you, Andy. When implementing Scrum, it's all or nothing. You know, you can't do Scrum-ish, you can't just say, oh, okay, let's try a couple of charts, or let's make a product backlog, you know. You really have got to dive in the whole way. But as I said earlier, you know, Scrum, I suspect, has never and probably will never fit a team or an organisation straight out of the box. It just doesn't work that way. There's too many complications, you know, the way that organisations work, the technology stack, all of this different kind of stuff, you know. You will have to tweak it, but the only way to really go is just to take the Scrum book, throw it at your organisation, and then start working on it from there. Another really important thing is to keep your team stable, you know. I talked earlier about all of the stuff with the pizza nights, you know, the emotional response from the team with constantly changing members. It's really damaging, you know. It's really, you know, in order for Scrum to work at its absolute best, you know, you need a team. And in order for a team to really gel and to really, really work together, they need to be stable. Micromanaging teams is absolutely not on. You know, the core of this entire ethos is that the team is cross-discipline, they can do everything themselves, and they're self-managing. Scrum teams in a non-Scrum environment, in my opinion, will never reach their full potential velocity. This is something that we really, really struggle with at Philips, because the entire organisation is based on projects. It's Waterfall, you know, there's project initiation documents, there's a whole huge process.
It's basically getting the funding done before you can actually start.
Yeah, exactly. And the business really, really struggles with interfacing with Scrum, because basically they're told, yeah, you know, you can have a fixed budget, but then we can't guarantee the amount of functionality that you get at the end of it. Same for a fixed deadline. You know? Or if you lose the deadline in time terms and insist on fixed functionality, we can't guarantee the costs or the timeline. You know, that's the way that Scrum works. And, you know, in terms of the heartbeat of an organisation, you know, when we first started Scrumming at Philips, we were using 2-week iterations, but our releases were every 3 weeks. And this caused immense problems. It just doesn't work, you know, because constantly you're in a situation, you know, a regular story for the Scrum teams was prepare, go live and support go live. Prepare, go live was all about handing over documentation, doing knowledge transfer. Support go live was all about fixing severity 1 issues in production. And those stories we got allocated a stock amount of poker points for, and sometimes we'd have 3 days in which to do it, and sometimes we'd have 3 weeks. I mean, it just didn't work. And so it's really important that the heartbeat of the organisation, whatever it is you're doing, whatever it is you're using Scrum for, in my opinion, and the opinion of many people I've spoken to, it works best if Scrum is implemented from the top down.
In Lean, there's a word for that, tax time.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll have to read up about that. Scrum is an attitude. The process is there mostly as a catalyst, and all of these artifacts, all of these rituals, all of these things that we do,
Oops, that's a weird artifact.
That's good, isn't it? That's better. When you first start scrumming, you don't see the point of these things, or certainly I didn't. It seemed like a silly little game. I did a project at CBS, and they'd implemented Scrum-ish. They had stickies, they had a board, they didn't have a burn down chart, but they had stickies, and they had a funny little morning stand up, and that was basically it. And I didn't see the point of it. It seemed completely futile to me. It didn't seem to add anything at all. And it was only when I went and worked at Philips and did full-blown Scrum that it all kind of clicked into place, and it took a long time actually. Little examples like I showed you earlier with the burn down chart, and how it reflects back to the team and the business, and just the ways of working and how it pulls everyone together. And until you've been through a couple of projects and really seen the output and what actually happens when you do Scrum, you don't realise, and it's just an attitude, All of these tools are just there to get you working and thinking in a particular way. And it takes a really long time to get right. We've been doing it at Philips for, 14 months now, something like that, and it is still absolutely far from right. My tester, he's putting together a presentation for Sachin, who he works for, about agile testing in Scrum. And he said to me today that he'd read through one of Jeff Sutherland's books. Jeff Sutherland's the original implementer of Scrum. And he said that he felt really sad because all of the benefits that Jeff Sutherland talks about in his book, he doesn't see at Philips. And that just shows how far they've still got to go before they get this right, before they get it working really, really well. And a lot of that's to do with the way the organisation works, and it doesn't fit Scrum, and whatever. It's something that takes a long time, and it takes dedicated people, and it takes a stable workforce. But most importantly, you've got to get buy-in from everyone, from the top down. And this, this reflects all from every level of Scrum. I've talked about how the Scrum Master, he can't tell people what to do. It's got to come from the team. And actually, the same applies for business. You've got to have buy-in from people, otherwise it just won't work. And different people take different periods of time to get into Scrum, and some of them never do. The bottom line is, it takes time, it takes patience. So, thanks for listening. Are there any questions? I think Rudy's got some from Andy.
Any questions here?
Right. How do you think, does it cost more time to use Scrum instead of a traditional waterfall type of developing? Or does it like to go faster?
Yeah, well, that's the question everyone asks, It appears that Scrum would take more time because there's more overhead, there's more meetings, there's more processes. But actually, if you compare two projects running side by side, producing the same thing with people with similar skills, and you do one waterfall and you do one Scrum, if it's an experienced Scrum team, I bet you anything the Scrum will come out better in the end. And it's not just about the time that it takes, it's about the quality of the product at the end. And as I mentioned earlier, if you do things waterfall and you start off with a business trying to design a piece of software and then chucking it over to an implementation team in immense detail so they just churn out code, the product that you get at the end of it is probably not going to be as fit for purpose as the one that you get out of Scrum. Sure, the communication between the teams and the business take more time, but you get way more business value. You get way more value for your money. And, even if the Scrum process does take more time, you get a better quality product. And also, if problems arise, you get a releasable product at the end of every sprint. And that's really key.
Is Scrum also very bridgeable for if somebody wants to go on a holiday during
During
a
a sprint.
critical time or sprint, or somebody gets ill or sick also? Because I hear a dedicated team, and there's of course always the best effort, but how do you cope with that?
Okay, well, you know, one of the things that they say in Scrum is that the team should be multidisciplinary, and that doesn't just mean people from all disciplines, but also that the people can be cross-discipline. And ideally, in a Scrum team, there shouldn't be titles. Of course, this is almost never achievable. But you'll find in an experienced Scrum team that when someone does go away, other people are able to pick up their slack and pick up their work. And of course, you will have reduced velocity, and if someone does go sick, then there's always the potential that you might not make the sprint. But I feel that the impacts will be less than in a waterfall situation. But yeah, it's difficult to deal with. I mean, usually, you know, when people are booking holidays, the expectation is that you book your holiday from the end of a sprint. You know, you don't go on holiday mid-sprint. And then that means that the team is then in a position to say during their planning session, okay, we know we're down one developer, so therefore we commit to less. We know that our velocity will be reduced. And then that feeds back into the business. It means that it's more predictable. The business knows up front, okay, we're going to produce less this sprint. You know, everything's more predictable, more transparent. But yeah, it's difficult to deal with.
Yeah. What happens with story points that are not done at the end of the sprint?
Right. They come back onto the backlog. And they, by default, become the highest priority, because they were the highest priority of the sprint before, so therefore they supersede anything that's left on the backlog. And so what happens in our setup is those stories basically automatically go straight into our sprint planning for the following sprint, and we decide what else we can take on.
Just noted that you didn't say anything.
Yeah, sorry. But as I said earlier, also
it's quite obvious actually.
Yeah.
When you understand the principle.
Yeah. But of course, as I said earlier, you know, that cuts both ways. You know, you saw in our definition of done that we expect something from the business for our stories before we mark them as done. And so, you know, if we stand up in a demo and say, yeah, these stories are not done, and it's because the business hasn't provided us with the content or whatever it is, that costs them money, and they get upset because, you know, it reduces velocity next sprint, they've got less sprints done, it screws up their planning, and it makes them work better.
You may want to mention the definition of ready.
Oh, the definition of ready. Okay, well, yeah, this is something that's, actually today we had a backlog grooming session. That's a ritual that I haven't mentioned because it's, I don't think it's a particularly standard one. But this is something we started doing within our team. We sit down with the BAs and the architects, and we look at stories that are ready for poker, and also stories that we've pokered previously, and we go over them. And during a poker session, you know, quite often the team will have questions about the stories that haven't been answered in the functional requirements of the specs, and that the BAs need to go away and think about or do whatever. And then when you come to the backlog grooming session, they tell us the answers and they tell us the solutions they've come up with, and then the team decides, is this ready? And then
So do we have the information and the resources to actually get started on this?
Yeah, exactly. So you know, strictly speaking, the definition of ready should be there's no external dependencies and there's no impediments, that kind of stuff, or no impediments that you see up front. And then we've got all of the requirements, all of the information, all of the artifacts, whatever, anything that we need to actually implement this. That's the definition of ready.
Basically, there could be a situation where, well, the business doesn't know, we don't know, well, let's start an experiment.
Yeah. So, but you know, in that case, strictly speaking, you shouldn't commit to the story. You shouldn't take it as a sprint.
But you could, yeah, I've seen examples of extreme programming where people say, okay, we know, let's create an experiment and put a couple of points into the experiment.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, actually, we've done that as well. You know, we've had stories come onto the backlog, which is do a proof of concept, or do some research, do some documentation. You know, figure stuff out. You know, that if it's something that's beyond the capability of the people who are producing the stories to actually get done, then can be given to the team and they can be pulled into that process.
It's one of the things that I read in Reinhardt. Doing experiments can be very valuable because it allows you to weed out things that are high risk.
Yeah, well, like traceability development. And actually, I should also mention at Philips we've got a slightly funny thing which is called the Ready Team. And that's basically a separate Scrum team whose entire job it is to produce stories and get them ready for sprint actually.
So there's a couple of remote questions. One of the questions is, for an organization considering implementing Scrum, what's the biggest benefit and what's the most difficult thing to do?
The biggest benefit is reduced risk. Reduce risk on your projects.
And what's the most difficult thing to go through in implementing the stuff?
The most difficult thing. Yeah, getting buy-in from everyone, I would say. I mean, it's a whole process, you know. Yeah, is there one most difficult thing? It depends on the organisation. It depends on the problems that you encounter. At Philips, for example, you know, the biggest problem that we've had is actually getting buy-in from the business. Because on our side, you know, on the technical side, on the IT side, we've got buy-in from everyone and everyone's doing it and it's going great. But then the interface with the rest of the business, that's the bit that's been the biggest challenge for us.
Which brings me to another question that is remote. Can you use Scrum for other than software development, and what's important there? And can you use it for operational work, and how should you proceed there?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I've got another question from Mountain Goat Software. Let's see if I can find that.
I may be able to provide some input on that.
So yeah, yes it can.
Joint
Okay.
strike fighter, wow.
Well, yeah, it's a bit of a failed project, but you know.
That's what I was
But yeah, it absolutely can, you know. Use the systems. What have we got here? Most of that's applications. Yeah, most of that is apps on subscription. But yeah, it can, you know. Lots of people have used Scrum for different things. It's been used to build cars, it's been used to build planes. And actually, I think you can implement Scrum for anything. Do you agree?
Agile, definitely.
Yeah.
Scrum is very specific. Rudy mentioned operations, and I've seen examples at DevOps days about the Kanban principle. Kanban is basically you make it up as you go system. You do have a board. You do have a ready doing and done, but you can redesign the board as according to your requirements, your operational requirements. There's one important factor when you use a Kanban board is that you, for every phase of the work, you basically limit the amount of work in progress.
Right, yeah.
And that's a very important instrument to prevent people from trying to do too much at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And for operational work, that is a very good help.
Yeah, definitely. Well, if I answer the question specifically for Andy and specifically for Peter, I think that Scrum is applicable anywhere where you need a team of people from different disciplines doing different types of work, working towards a similar goal, and you need them to work together. And, you know, I think a lot of the benefits from Scrum can really, really help you guys, right? You've got back office and you've got front office. You need to recruit people, you need to sell people, you need to find projects, you need to do the projects, you know? If you guys are sitting separately, doing your job separately, there's less knowledge bleed. And, you know, you don't feel the pain. Back office won't feel the pain of their bad hires. Only front office feel that. So, you know, by working together as a cross-discipline team, you'll learn more about each other's jobs and more about each other's requirements, and you will do your jobs better, and it will go smoothly. And then from Andy's perspective, you know, there's a lot of stuff that you guys are trying to achieve. And one of the major benefits of Scrum is it helps everyone, the business and the teams, to focus on what's important right now. And so yes, I would say that in your particular case and for operations, you absolutely can benefit from Scrum.
Okay, thanks. Another question. You've talked a lot about the requirements for the team, and what the team should be comprised of, and what the different people that you should have and you shouldn't have on a team. But what about the product owner? Is there requirements on that?
Yeah, the product owner should understand the product. I mean, it sounds obvious, but that is the most important thing. You know, the product owner should know what the product's trying to achieve. They should know what's most important. They should know in what order things need to be done to be most efficient, and you know, if there's dependencies between tasks, you know, to do things like that. Yeah, they should understand the business and they should understand the requirements. That's the most important thing.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Okay, yeah. By all means.
Why do you use story points instead of just estimating in hours how much time a task takes?
Because it would take too much time. You know, I don't know if you've ever tried to oversee a meeting between very knowledgeable technical people, but it's like herding cats. Right? It's incredibly difficult. And you know, if you present a team of technical people with a story as big as the business wants a website, and then ask them to try and estimate that in hours, you'll be there until the end of time.
Yeah.
You know, and they will want to plan out every single last detail, what tech they're using, you know, right down to the most basic level, and you know, you're just not going to get anywhere. And so the idea of doing these different levels of granularity of estimation is to keep it short and to keep it quick. And you know, as we've seen with the difficulties that we have even with our task planning, which is very fine-grained, you know, it's really, really pretty much impossible to say with any degree of accuracy how many hours something's going to take. And so you still want to give the business some feel for how big a piece of work is and roughly how long it's going to take to implement and how much it's going to cost, because that helps them with their planning, it makes things more transparent, you know, it helps the business. But to try and expect to do stuff in hours from the epic or even story level is just, to be honest, impractical. I think it just wouldn't work.
But then you guess everything in story points, or estimate everything in story points, and then you just compare that to the average that you do with your team or something like that?
Yeah, and as I say at Philips, you know, it kind of went a bit wrong because the you know, this is the big problem, you know, with our interface with the business. The business basically equated story points to money. You know, 24 story points, that's €200,000. You know, that's how they thought about it. And so what happened as a result of that is that all of the teams suddenly started doing 24 story points, right, every sprint. And the amounts of work were completely different, and so actually the value of the estimation went out of the window. Because what should really happen is the business says, okay, you know, I know that this size of story is 10 points, and that team will do 10 points in half a week, that team will do it in 2 weeks. And so the business lost some of their planning ability and some of their predictability as a result of that. So yeah, you know, as I said, at Philips, they did the right thing at the beginning. You know, they just picked a story and they assigned it an arbitrary number of points, and then they scaled everything out from there on either side. And then after that, it's just all about experience, you know, and some teams will do 20, some teams will do 10, whatever, and then the business will get a feel for what a story point means, and, you know, it's just all about helping the business with planning. The story points aren't for the team, they're for the business.
And how do the estimates relate to what is actually done?
How do you mean, like?
Well, if you estimate the tasks and story points.
I think there's a difference. The tasks are measured in hours.
Yeah, the tasks are measured in hours.
Well, I mean the stories. If you measure them in story points, and at the end of a sprint, how does it happen a lot of times that they're not done, or is it usually kind of spot on?
No. I mean, you know, it changes massively from sprint to sprint because the team can underestimate something, or there could be an external dependency or an impediment or something that happens, or people can go on holiday. You know, very often the team doesn't make a sprint. You know, very often they do fail. But what you will see as a general pattern is that they're usually there or thereabouts. And what, you know, just as often as the team doesn't manage to complete the work in a sprint, you'll have the other side of the coin, which is where the team finishes early and then they pick up extra stories.
I would be very suspicious of a team that would always deliver exactly on target.
Yeah, But that was beginning to happen with my team because, as I say, they were
Yeah.
engineering their story points. But no, I mean, if you're doing it properly, you know, I mean, it's just to give.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, it's on a very, very basic planning level. The team knows my team can do roughly 24 story points in 2 weeks. So if a story comes onto the backlog that's 40 story points, they know, okay, that doesn't fit in the sprint for sure. So they need to go back and redo their division of the story.
If you do statistical process control, you know that will be some variation.
Yeah.
The only thing you want to do with when you manage a process, you want to limit the amount of variation,
Yeah.
but you don't want to reduce the variation to zero.
No.
Because when you do that, you don't get any value.
Exactly. Yeah.
You will miss opportunities. You will actually start missing opportunities.
Yeah. And you know what you find is, as with everything in Scrum, as time goes on and the team works together for longer, they'll get more and more accurate in estimation. And so, you know, a super high velocity team, oh, that's something else I forgot to mention, a really, really high velocity team that's functioning superbly well should be able to do without their Scrum Master eventually. You know, they become completely self-managing, they estimate really, really well together because they know how each other works, and,
Yeah.
you know.
As long as you keep the team together.
Yeah, as long as you keep the team, exactly, the team has to be stable, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the end game, you know. That's the ultimate end game for any Scrum team, is to be able to just completely manage themselves, including all the communication with the stakeholders, everything, estimation, everything.
Okay, well, thank you. Oh, thank you, Reed. I heard those guys have Sail on video games.
Oh,
So, okay, well, in January we will have a competitive TED talk about networking, how M6 switches that many terabytes a second. Well, get on the website, see what else we have in stock for you, and well, hope we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Anyone is interested, I brought a couple of books about agile development and the sort of stuff, so you can thumb through them.